The weight of a human body makes a very specific sound when it is dragged over wet dirt. It is a heavy, sliding noise that stops and starts as the boots catch on exposed roots. I am listening to that exact sound right now, pressed flat under the floor of an old wooden shed. I can see the bright light of a flashlight shining through the cracks in the wood just inches above my face. It is 3 in the morning, and I know that if I make even a tiny sound, I am dead. I should have listened to the man in the orange tent. He tried to save me when the sun went down, but I was too stubborn to pay attention. My name is Arthur, and 3 days ago, I went hiking on a quiet part of the Appalachian Trail. I had been working 60 hours a week at a warehouse job in the city, and my mind felt completely drained. I packed my gear, took a week off, and drove out to the mountains to find some peace. The first 2 days were totally fine. I walked past a few other hikers, exchanged quick nods, and enjoyed the crisp mountain air. But by the afternoon of the 3rd day, the trail went completely empty. The woods changed around 4 o'clock. The birds stopped singing all at once, and the wind died down to nothing. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. I was walking toward a campsite near a small river called Devil's Elbow. My knees were aching from a long uphill climb, and my backpack felt like it was filled with lead. Every step required effort. When I finally got to the campsite at 5:30, the sky was already turning a dark, bruised purple. The camping area was much smaller than my map indicated. It was just a tight clearing surrounded by thick, dark rhododendron bushes that formed a solid wall of black wood. In the middle of the clearing sat a single, bright orange tent. It was set up perfectly, with heavy stakes driven deep into the dirt. But there was no campfire, no trash, and no sign of anyone around it. I dropped my heavy pack on a flat rock near the edge of the clearing. I was glad to see another person because the total silence of the woods was starting to make me feel uneasy. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing against my ears. I pulled out my small gas stove to cook some freeze-dried beef stew for dinner. The metal pot made a sharp, clinking noise in the quiet woods, and the sound echoed off the trees. Suddenly, the zipper on the orange tent started to move. The door of the tent didn't open all the way. A man looked out through a small triangular gap at the very top of the door flap. He looked about 50 years old, with a short gray beard and wide, bloodshot eyes. He didn't look at my stove or my pack. His gaze shot straight past me, staring into the dark trees behind my left shoulder. "Get in," he whispered. His voice was cracked and shaking with terror. I just sat there on the rock with my food packet in my hand. "What did you say?" I asked, forcing a polite smile. "Do not look around, and do not make another sound," the man whispered fiercely. "Leave your backpack on the rock and crawl into this tent right now." I didn't move. You meet strange people in the woods sometimes, and I figured he was just having a bad psychological breakdown from being alone too long. I thought the isolation had broken his nerves. "I'm fine, man," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "I have my own tent in my pack. I'll just set up on the other side of the dirt." The man's face twisted into an expression of pure, desperate pity. "You don't get it," he hissed, his jaw trembling. "Someone has been following you for miles. He walked right in your footsteps for 2 hours, and he is standing in the bushes behind you right now." I felt a cold prickle of fear on my neck, but my brain refused to believe him. If someone was behind me, I would have heard them stepping on the dry leaves and sticks that lined the trail. "There is nobody out there, friend," I said, standing up to show him I wasn't afraid. "It's just the wind. You should drink some water and get some rest." The man stared at me for 3 long seconds, realizing I wasn't going to move. "God help you," he said softly. He pulled the zipper down fast, locking the tent shut from the inside. I heard him click the plastic buckles together, and then I heard the rustle of a heavy sleeping bag as he retreated into the farthest corner away from the door. I stood alone in the dark campsite. The sun was totally gone now, and the forest was an absolute wall of blackness. I looked behind me into the thick bushes, but I couldn't see anything through the dense leaves. I decided not to camp there. The weird encounter had completely ruined my mood, and I didn't want to sleep 20 feet away from a man who was clearly unstable. I pulled out my phone to check my digital map. There was an old Forestry Service shelter marked 3 miles further down the trail, so I decided to push through the dark to get there. I shoved my uncooked food back into my pack, buckled the chest strap, and clicked my headlamp onto its lowest setting. Walking into the dark woods felt like stepping into a cold, empty vacuum. I walked very fast, the small beam of light bouncing off the white paint marks on the trees that guided the path. My breath was loud in the cold night air, and my boots made a steady crunching sound on the gravel. After about 40 minutes of hiking, I stopped to adjust my pack. That was when I heard the first strange noise. It was a faint metal clinking sound, like a loose buckle hitting a metal frame. I froze instantly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I held my breath and listened closely, turning my head toward the darkness behind me. The woods went dead quiet again. I told myself it was just my own gear shifting against my jacket, so I took a deep breath and started walking again. 2 minutes later, I heard another sound. It was the distinct, wet sound of a heavy boot sole slipping off a slick tree root. The sound came from right behind, a big granite rock I had passed just 30 seconds ago. Someone was definitely following me, and they were navigating the pitch-black trail without using any light at all. A wave of pure terror hit my chest. The man in the orange tent hadn't been crazy. Someone was actually tracking me through the dark, and they knew how to move through the woods without making a sound. I didn't turn around to shine my light because I didn't want the person to know I had discovered them. Instead, I reached up and turned my headlamp completely off. The world went pitch black instantly. I stepped slowly off the dirt path, placing my boots on the soft moss so I wouldn't make a sound, and hid behind a massive oak tree. I pulled my small pocket knife out of my jeans. I clicked the blade open with my thumb, holding it tight against my chest, my knuckles turning white. The footsteps on the trail didn't hesitate. A person wearing heavy leather logging boots walked right up to the exact spot where I had turned off my light. I could hear them breathing in the dark. It wasn't the heavy panting of a tired person. It was slow, calm, and incredibly steady breathing. They stood there for a whole minute, realizing that my light had vanished and that they had lost their target. Then, I heard the heavy rustle of a thick canvas coat as the person turned around. They didn't search the bushes where I was hiding. Instead, they started walking back up the trail, moving quickly back toward the campsite. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. The killer wasn't wasting time looking for me in the dark because he knew the old man was trapped inside that thin orange tent with nowhere to run. I should have stayed hidden behind that oak tree until morning. But a horrible sense of guilt took over my mind. The old man had tried to save my life, and my arrogance had left him completely defenseless. I waited until the heavy boots faded away, and then I stepped back onto the trail. I didn't use my light. I just felt the edge of the dirt path with my hands and feet, moving back toward Devil's Elbow in the pitch black. The return trip took over an hour because I kept losing the path. When I finally got close to the clearing, the smell hit me first. The air was thick with the scent of burning plastic and a sharp, metallic smell that made me feel sick. I crept to the edge of the clearing, parting the wet leaves with my hands to look inside. The orange tint was completely gone. It was just a smoking, melted pile of black nylon on the scorched dirt. A massive man was standing in the middle of the ruined camp. He was easily 6 feet 5 inches tall, with broad shoulders covered in a dirty, oversized canvas coat. His heavy boots were caked in thick, wet mud. He was holding a long, rusted iron bar that looked like a tool used to pull railroad spikes. The giant man reached down, grabbed a heavy bundle from the ground, and began to drag it toward an old, overgrown logging road that branched off the trail. The sliding sound of the body moving through the brush was incredibly loud in the quiet night. I backed away from the trees, my knees shaking so badly I could barely stand. I turned and ran down the trail as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that man as possible. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire. My headlamp flashed on, the bright beam bouncing crazily off the tree trunks as I sprinted through the dark tunnel of branches. After a mile of running, the trail opened up into an old, abandoned logging camp. There was a large wooden building that had completely collapsed years ago, but a small stone-walled tool shed was still standing near the edge of the trees. I lunged through the open doorway of the shed, tripped on a loose stone, and fell hard onto the wooden floorboards. My headlamp flew off my head, smashed against the stone wall, and the light died. I didn't try to find it in the dark. I crawled on my hands and knees across the dusty floor until my fingers found a loose, rotted board near the back wall. I pulled it up and squeezed my body into the tight, dirt crawl space underneath the floor. The space was damp and smelled like old earth and spiders. I lay flat on my stomach, my chin pressed into the dirt, and looked up through the half-inch cracks between the floorboards above me. 20 minutes passed in total silence. I held my pocket knife tight against my palm and forced myself to take tiny, shallow breaths so the dust wouldn't make me cough. Then, the heavy dragging noise came back. It was coming from the trail, moving straight into the clearing toward the shed. Slide. Drag. Slide. The killer had followed the sound of my running boots and my bright headlamp straight to this old building. He wasn't rushing. He was walking with total confidence. The noise stopped right outside the open doorway of the shed. Through the cracks in the floorboards, I saw two massive leather boots appear. They were covered in wet mud that dripped onto the floor. The terrible smell of copper and unwashed canvas filled the small room right above my head. The giant man stood perfectly still for 5 minutes, just listening to the darkness. The floorboards directly above my face bent downward from his immense weight, the wood creaking loudly and almost touching my hair. He clicked on a heavy metal flashlight. The bright white beam shot down through the cracks in the floorboards, illuminating the dirt just inches away from my nose. If he tilted his hand even a little bit, he would see my face in the dirt. But the light moved away, scanning the rest of the room. He walked to the back corner, his boots stepping right on my broken headlamp. I heard the plastic crunch loudly into pieces beneath his heel, followed by a low, satisfied grunt from the man. Then, he walked back to the open doorway. He reached up, grabbed the rotted wooden frame of the door with his bare hands, and pulled down with incredible strength. The wood snapped with a deafening crash. He wasn't trying to come under the floor. He was blocking the door from the outside, piling heavy wooden beams and large granite rocks against the opening to trap me inside the shed. I listened to him moving outside the building for 10 minutes, shifting heavy debris until the doorway was completely sealed. Then, his heavy boots started to walk away, the sound fading back down the trail toward the main campsite. That was 4 hours ago. The first gray light of the morning is finally starting to show through the cracks in the floorboards now. I am freezing cold, my muscles are locked up, and my legs hurt from laying flat in the dirt for so long. The doorway of the shed is completely blocked by a solid wall of rocks and logs. I tried to push up against the floorboards above me, but they are pinned down by the weight of the collapsed roof and won't budge. I am trapped in a dirt hole in the middle of a massive forest. My phone is dead, my water bottle is back in my backpack at the campsite, and my knife is useless against a wall of stone. Suddenly, the birds in the trees outside stop singing all at once. The forest goes completely quiet again. I hear something moving through the brush at the edge of the clearing. It isn't an animal, and it isn't the wind. It is a heavy, slow boot step walking right back toward the shed. The killer is returning to the camp before the sun gets too high in the sky. He knows I'm still down here. He knows I have nowhere left to run. I can hear his heavy logging boots crunching on the gravel right outside the foundation wall of the shed. He walks around to the side where the loose board is located. The floorboard right above my head creaks loudly as his massive weight steps directly onto the wood. A heavy flashlight clicks on, its bright white light shooting straight through the crack and directly into my terrified eyes. A low, creepy voice whispers through the wood. "Found you."